In the quiet town of Fayetteville, North Carolina, a tragedy unfolded that would baffle investigators for decades. On May 9, 1985, Catherine Katie Eastburn and her two young daughters, Kara and Erin, were found brutally murdered in their home. Their 22-month-old daughter, Jana, was the sole survivor, left unharmed in her crib. The case seemed straightforward, until a twist of fate led authorities to a man who had been in the Eastburn home just days before. Sergeant Timothy Hennis, a U.S. Army soldier, had responded to an ad to adopt the family's dog. But what began as a routine visit spiraled into a complex web of suspicion, trials, and legal battles. Over the next 25 years, Hennis would face not one, but 3 trials for the murders. Each trial brought new revelations, casting doubt and raising questions about justice, memory, and the pursuit of truth. Was Hennis the killer? Or was he a victim of a flawed system? Join us as we unravel the chilling story of the Eastburn family murders, a tale of tragedy, controversy, and the relentless quest for justice. In 1985, Catherine Katie Eastburn was a 31-year-old mother living a quiet life in Fayetteville, North Carolina. She had been married to her husband, Sergeant William Eastburn, an Air Force pilot, and together they had built a loving home for their 3 daughters, Kara, 5 years old, Erin, just 3. And the youngest, Jana, only 22 months old. Katie had recently separated from William after years of marriage, choosing to start a new chapter for herself and her children. While adjusting to life as a single mother, Katie was deeply committed to ensuring her daughters thrived despite the changes in their lives. She worked tirelessly to maintain a sense of normalcy, balancing motherhood with the responsibilities that came with raising 3 young girls on her own. Her life, though filled with its challenges, was grounded in love. One sign of her determination to give her children a stable environment was an ad she placed in the local paper seeking a new home for their family dog. Katie had no way of knowing that this seemingly small decision would set off a chain of events that would alter their lives forever. On the morning of May 9, 1985, a neighbor named Lee Smith grew concerned when she noticed something unusual. Katie Eastburn's car, usually parked in the driveway, was absent. But more disturbing was the silence emanating from the Eastburn home. Normally, the house would be filled with the sounds of children playing. Today, there was nothing. Worried, Lee Smith called the Fayetteville police. When officers arrived at the house on the 4700 block of Southmont Drive, they were met with an eerie stillness. A forced entry at the back door suggested a break-in. Inside, the scene they discovered would haunt them forever. In the master bedroom, Katie Eastburn's body lay sprawled on the bed. She had been brutally assaulted. The coroner's report would later confirm she had been raped and stabbed 15 times. But it wasn't just her. Her 2 young daughters, Kara and Erin, were also found in their beds, lifeless. Kara had been strangled, and Erin was suffocated, the only signs of violence being the imprints of the blankets over their small bodies. But perhaps the most harrowing part of the discovery came from the crib. Amidst the carnage, 22-month-old Jana Eastburn was found, unharmed but in a state of shock. She had been left alone for days without food or water, crying in her crib. Yet somehow, she had survived the massacre that claimed her mother and 2 siblings. As detectives combed through the house, there were signs that this wasn't a typical robbery gone wrong. The assailant had not taken anything of value from the house. The family's belongings, untouched, hinted at a far darker motive. Whoever had committed this crime had not just taken lives, there was something personal about this attack. The only real clue was a single, strange piece of evidence, an ATM card found in the possession of a man who had been seen in the area days before the murder. This lead would soon focus investigators' attention on Sergeant Timothy Hennis, a local U.S. Army soldier, whose involvement with the family's dog was about to place him at the center of one of the most complicated murder investigations in Fayetteville's history. But there was something more disturbing than the brutality of the crime itself. There were more questions than answers. Who would do such a thing? Why this family? And how could a man who had simply come to pick up a dog become a prime suspect in the most horrific case the town had ever seen? The investigation was just beginning, and every answer led to more confusion, setting the stage for a trial that would send shockwaves through the justice system. As investigators combed through the Eastburn home, they found no immediate signs of forced entry, which suggested that the killer might have been someone the family knew. But the brutality of the crime left them with more questions than answers. The search for evidence led them to a chilling realization. Someone close to the family might have been responsible. And then, the breakthrough came. Weeks before the murders, Katie Eastburn had placed an ad in the local paper. She was looking to rehome the family dog. The response came from an unlikely source, Sergeant Timothy Hennis, a U.S. Army soldier stationed nearby at Fort Bragg. Hennis had visited the Eastburn home just days before the killings, on May 7, to pick up the dog. The encounter had been brief, casual, and seemingly innocent. But now, investigators began to wonder if there was more to his visit than met the eye. A few days later, as the bodies were discovered and the investigation gained momentum, authorities found that a man matching Hennis's description had been seen near the Eastburn home in the hours following the murders. It was becoming clear that Hennis, by his proximity to the scene, was emerging as a key person of interest. But it wasn't just the witness statements that raised red flags. Authorities uncovered another piece of disturbing evidence. Katie's stolen ATM card had been used, not once, but twice after the murders, both transactions occurring in areas that were within a short distance of Hennis's apartment. At first, it seemed like a simple case of circumstantial evidence linking Hennis to the crime. But as investigators continued to piece together the puzzle, they faced one critical problem. Physical evidence that could definitively tie him to the scene was nowhere to be found. No fingerprints, no hair, no blood. To make matters more complicated, the footprint found outside the Eastburn home, one that appeared to be left by the killer, did not match Hennis's shoes. In fact, it was a full 3 sizes smaller than his. Still, as Hennis became the focal point of the investigation, the authorities decided to take a closer look at his background. Timothy Hennis was a man who seemed to have it all: a stable job, a promising military career, a family. He had no known history of violent behavior, and to many, the thought of him being involved in such a brutal crime seemed unimaginable. But with the mounting evidence, and Hennis's continued presence in the investigation, one question remained: was Hennis guilty, or was he simply the victim of a hasty investigation? For now, the case remained cold, but the pressure was building. And soon, the fate of Sergeant Timothy Hennis would be determined in a courtroom, a trial that would span years, with more twists than anyone could have anticipated. As the investigation into the Eastburn family murders progressed, the evidence against Timothy Hennis began to mount, though the case was far from clear-cut. Hennis had been a seemingly innocent figure in the community, a young Army sergeant with no known criminal history. But it was his connection to the Eastburn family that drew him into the center of the investigation. Authorities discovered that just days before the murders, Hennis had visited the Eastburn home to answer an ad placed by Katie Eastburn. She was trying to rehome her dog, and Hennis, looking to adopt a pet, had agreed to meet. Though their interaction was brief, it was enough to leave a mark on investigators. Witnesses placed him near the scene of the crime on the night the murders occurred. The pieces seemed to fall into place when investigators found Hennis's fingerprints on a magazine in the Eastburn home and discovered that the family's ATM card had been used after the murders. But despite the mounting circumstantial evidence, one crucial element was missing: any physical evidence directly linking Hennis to the crime. No blood or DNA samples matched him. The crime scene itself offered no definitive link. Still, the evidence of the stolen ATM card and witness testimony seemed like enough to move forward with the trial. In 1986, Hennis stood trial for the murders of Catherine, Kara, and Aaron Eastburn. The prosecution painted a damning picture. Hennis had been in the Eastburn home, and the stolen ATM card suggested his involvement in the crime. With his fingerprints found on items at the scene, they argued he had a motive, though the exact reason for the brutal killings was unclear. The defense, however, maintained that there was no concrete evidence, and the case against Hennis was built entirely on circumstantial details. The trial was tense, as the public and media closely followed the proceedings. Hennis's defense team poked holes in the prosecution's narrative, pointing out the lack of direct forensic evidence and questioning the credibility of the witnesses. But it was the emotional weight of the case, the brutal slaying of a mother and her 2 young daughters, that swayed the jury. In the end, despite the lack of physical evidence, Timothy Hennis was found guilty of the triple murder. He was sentenced to death, a decision that shocked many, given the questionable nature of the case. Some believed he had been wrongly convicted, others argued that the conviction was a necessary step in bringing closure to the Eastburn family's tragic deaths. But this was not the end of the story. After his conviction in 1986, Timothy Hennis sat on death row, sentenced for a crime he insisted he didn't commit. But as time passed, the flaws in the prosecution's case began to surface. The case that had seemed so clear-cut was unraveling. In 1988, the North Carolina Supreme Court ruled that the graphic crime scene photos, shown during the trial, had influenced the jury's judgment unfairly. The decision was a pivotal moment. Hennis' conviction was overturned, and a retrial was granted. The retrial in 1989 was a fresh battle, one that brought new hope to Hennis and his defense team. The prosecution's case remained largely the same, but this time, the defense had discovered a crucial new witness, someone who resembled Hennis and was seen near the Eastburn home around the time of the murders. This was a bombshell that could turn the tide of the trial. Even with the new testimony, the evidence against Hennis continued to be shaky. The prosecution had no physical evidence directly linking him to the crime scene, no fingerprints, no DNA, not even a footprint that matched his shoe size. What once seemed like an airtight case now appeared full of holes. In the face of these inconsistencies, the jury had to make a difficult decision: could they convict a man with such little direct evidence against him? After careful deliberation, the jury returned with a stunning verdict: Timothy Hennis was acquitted of all charges. As the courtroom erupted in disbelief, Hennis was set free. But his newfound freedom didn't come with relief. He was left with a haunting question: was he truly innocent, or had the justice system failed to bring the true killer to justice? As the years passed, the Eastburn family murders remained an open wound, with lingering questions and unanswered clues. The community of Fayetteville, North Carolina, and the families involved, were left with a sense of incomplete justice. But in 2006, a new development would breathe new life into the case. Advances in forensic technology were changing the way investigators looked at old cases, and the Eastburn case was no exception. New DNA analysis techniques had come a long way since the original trials, and authorities realized they could take another look at the physical evidence, something they hadn't been able to do before. It was then that a key piece of evidence was uncovered: semen found on the body of Catherine Eastburn. After years of being ignored, new DNA testing revealed a match to none other than Timothy Hennis. The same man who had been acquitted in 1989. The very man who had once walked free after the jury had concluded that there wasn't enough evidence to convict him. This new revelation set off a chain of events that would once again shake the foundation of the case. Prosecutors, who had believed the case was closed, found themselves standing at a crossroads. The physical evidence, the semen, the DNA, did not lie. The twist? The DNA had been in the system for years, but the match had never been made, as it wasn't until much later that the DNA databases were expanded to allow for such a comparison. It was as if the system itself had failed to catch the truth all these years. Timothy Hennis, the man who had been a suspect from the very beginning, now found himself back in the spotlight. With DNA evidence finally pointing to his involvement, the question was no longer one of who committed the crime. It was about how the justice system had let him walk free all those years. But this wasn't the end of the story. In fact, it was only the beginning. The prosecution would soon face an unprecedented legal challenge: Timothy Hennis, having been acquitted in 1989, could not be retried for the same crime. Or so it seemed. The concept of double jeopardy, protecting a person from being tried twice for the same offense, was a legal principle that had to be carefully navigated. But then came the shocking news: Hennis could face trial once again, not in civilian court, but in a military court-martial. The question now was not if Hennis would face justice, but whether a military court could prosecute him for a crime he'd already been acquitted of under civilian law. The reopening of the case was a legal landmark, an intersection between military and civilian justice, and it was about to take Hennis back to the courtroom once again. After Timothy Hennis was acquitted in the civilian courts, many believed the case was closed. But justice was far from settled. In 2006, a breakthrough came, one that would change everything. Forensic advancements in DNA testing had evolved, and new technology allowed investigators to revisit old evidence. This included the semen found on Catherine Eastburn's body, DNA that had been painstakingly preserved for over 2 decades. In 2006, DNA testing confirmed it: Hennis's DNA was a match. The same man who had been acquitted of the murders years earlier was now linked to the crime scene in a way no one had anticipated. But the story didn't end with the discovery of DNA. The legal system had its own set of rules that would allow for one final chapter in the case. Under the dual sovereignty doctrine, a legal principle that allows both state and federal courts to prosecute the same person for the same crime, the U.S. Army had the authority to bring Hennis to trial once again. This time, in a military court. In 2010, the Army called Hennis back to the stand, not in a civilian courtroom, but in a military court-martial. The same man who had once served his country with honor was now facing charges in a military court, where the rules were different, and the stakes even higher. The prosecution's case was built almost entirely on the DNA evidence. But the defense? They argued that the evidence wasn't enough. The decades-old DNA, they claimed, was inconclusive. Could it have been planted, or was it simply a case of mistaken identity? But the military court was unmoved by these arguments. After a tense trial, the jury found Timothy Hennis guilty of the murders of Catherine Eastburn and her 2 young daughters. In a twist no one saw coming, the same man who had been acquitted in civilian court would now face the ultimate punishment. Hennis was sentenced to death once again. But this case, unlike many others, did not fade into obscurity. It raised questions not just about one man's guilt or innocence, but about the very nature of justice itself. Had the right man been convicted? Or had the courts failed to provide clarity all along? The Eastburn family's search for closure was finally over, but for the public, one question remained: was justice truly served? The Eastburn family murders sent shockwaves through Fayetteville, a community once thought to be safe. The brutal nature of the crime, the mystery surrounding the killer, and the long legal battle left an indelible mark on those involved, and on the public's perception of justice. For the Eastburn family, the pain was unimaginable. Katie's parents, John and Christine Eastburn, were devastated by the loss of their daughter and granddaughters. They became vocal advocates for justice, tirelessly seeking answers even after the multiple trials and the decades-long battle for truth. Their fight wasn't just for conviction, it was for closure, for understanding what happened to their loved ones. Despite the decades of legal battles, their pain never truly healed. Timothy Hennis's legal journey didn't just affect him, it also sparked debates about the U.S. justice system. His first conviction in 1986, followed by an acquittal in 1989, ignited a conversation about the fairness of trials and the reliability of forensic evidence. For many, it seemed as though the system failed to deliver justice. But in 2006, the advent of DNA testing reopened the case with new evidence, leading to Hennis's court-martial in 2010. Hennis's conviction in military court felt like a bittersweet resolution for many. While some believed the right man had finally been convicted, others were left questioning the integrity of the previous trials. Was the acquittal in civilian court a sign of a broken system? Could more have been done sooner to secure justice for the victims? The case became a point of contention for legal experts, raising questions about the dual sovereignty doctrine and whether a person could be tried multiple times for the same crime under different jurisdictions. For the Eastburns, however, the conviction did not bring the comfort they had hoped for. Despite the long-awaited verdict, they were left grappling with the painful reality that their loved ones could never be returned. The sense of finality they sought remained elusive. The impact of the murders and the years of uncertainty weighed heavily on the family. As the years passed, the case was used as a case study in legal education, with law schools and criminal justice programs analyzing the failures and successes within the case. The Eastburn murders and the subsequent trials became a symbol of both the failures and potential of the justice system, highlighting the importance of forensic evidence, fair trials, and the persistence of victims' families seeking the truth. After years of legal battles, Sergeant Timothy Hennis was finally convicted in 2010, not in a civilian court, but in a military court-martial, based on new DNA evidence that linked him to the crime scene. Yet, questions remain. Was justice truly served, or did this case reveal flaws in the system meant to protect the innocent? The Eastburn family will never get their loved ones back. But the story of this case isn't just about tragedy, it's about the relentless pursuit of justice, no matter how long it takes. As we reflect on this case, we must ask ourselves, how many other cases are left in the shadows, waiting for the truth to be uncovered? If you found this story unsettling, or if you have your own theories about what truly happened that night, we want to hear from you. Was Timothy Hennis the real killer, or was he wrongfully convicted? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories that continue to captivate and challenge our perceptions of justice.